Hello. I'm going to read you a story. It was one of my favourite stories ever growing up. This is definitely a kid's story, but I think it's just beautiful, and I hope that you like it as much as I do. It is called The Baby Angel. When I was a little girl, and my sister was a little girl, our dear next-door friend, Mrs. Coco Jones, was always washing and dusting and polishing her clean, tidy house. My little sister often went to visit Mrs. Jones when she was doing her work. Sometimes she helped her, and sometimes she just sat and watched. Mrs. Coco Jones was always busy too. Painting, sawing, nailing, gluing things. Mr. Coco Jones stuck up wallpaper and mended pipes. When he wasn't doing these things, he'd go outside and do something new to his garden. He didn't just plant flowers and vegetables like our father. Oh, no. He made pretty paths with big stones and stuck seashells like fans all along the edges. He put a big stone basin on top of a pipe for the birds to bathe in, and he made a garden seat for Mrs. Coco out of twisty branches. My sister used to love watching clever Mr. Jones at work. One day, Mr. Jones brought home a big barrow full of rocks and stones. He put all the stones in a heap by his back door. Then he put lots of earth on the heap and planted flowers in the earth. My sister said, "What are you doing that for, Mr. Coco?" And Mr. Coco said he was making a rockery. He said in the summer, when the flowers were out, it would make a nice bit of colour. And when the summer came, Mr. Coco's rockery was beautiful. It was so beautiful that Mother said she would like a rockery too, and Father said he'd make her one next spring. My sister said she would like a rockery as well, but she didn't wait at all. She went down to the rubbishy end of our garden and collected lots of bricks and stones and earth and made herself a little rockery right away. My funny sister made her rockery, but she didn't put flowers in it like Mr. Coco did. She looked all over our rubbish heap and found pieces of blue glass and red glass and broken china and pretty patterns. She stuck them on her rockery instead. Mr. Coco said my sister's rockery was a good idea because it would be pretty all year round. He said his rockery was only pretty when the flowers were out. My little sister smiled at that. Kind Mr. Coco said if she wanted any more things for her rockery, she could come and look at his rubbish heap and see if she could find anything there. "Only mind you don't cut yourself on something sharp," Mr. Coco said, "or I'll have Mrs. Jones after me." My sister found a lot of interesting things for her rockery on the Coco Jones rubbish heap. She found pieces of china and glass and a piece of old bubble pipe. She found one of those diamond-looking sparkly bottle stoppers, one of Mr. Coco's path shells that he'd thrown away because he didn't need it. She found half a little crockery dog and a round, white china thing with a pretty little face on it. My sister was so pleased with all these things. She put them on her rockery straight away. She put the little half dog on the top and the pretty smiley face thing in the front where it smiled and smiled. Everybody said her rockery looked very pretty, even Father, and he didn't often say things like that. Well now, one day when my sister went to visit Mrs. Coco, she found that dear Lady Coco Jones was very busy. Mrs. Coco had a very beautiful best front room, and in this room was a big glass cupboard with all Mrs. Coco's very best china in it. When my sister came in, Mrs. Coco was washing all of the lovely china from the glass cupboard, and she said if my sister would promise not to touch anything, she could come and stand by the table on a stool and watch. Mrs. Jones had lots of lovely china. She washed it all very carefully in soapy water and dried it very, very carefully afterwards with an old soft tea towel. She had plates with roses on, teapots, vases, little Chinamen, ladies with fans and dishes and tiny red drinking glasses. My sister hadn't seen all these things close before, but she only looked, she didn't touch a thing. When Mrs. Coco was washing a black teapot with yellow daisies on it, she said, "Oh, dear, there's something in here." My sister looked to see what was in the teapot, and Mrs. Jones showed her a wet, soapy paper bundle. "Oh, dear," said Mrs. Coco, "I'd forgotten all about the baby angel." And she carefully opened the wet, soapy paper, and inside was a white china baby angel with tiny wings and no clothes on. It was holding a white china basket with white flowers in it. My sister looked hard at the little angel and she said, "Oh, that poor, poor angel. It hasn't got a head." And it hadn't. Miss Coco said, "All this china came from my old auntie. The little angel was broken when we unpacked it, but Mr. Jones said he'd mend it for me." Then she told my sister that Mr. Coco hadn't been able to mend it because the head had disappeared. Mrs. Coco said, "I suppose it must have got burned up when Mr. Jones got rid of all the paper the china was wrapped in. It's such a shame. Oh, I always loved that little angel when I was a girl." My little sister looked very hard at that baby angel. And then she remembered something. She remembered the white china thing with the pretty smiling face that she had in her rockery. She didn't say a word to Mrs. Coco. She slipped off the stool, ran out of the house, through the little gate, up to our garden, straight to her rockery and back again. "Here it is, Mrs. Coco. Here it is," my little sister said. "Here's the baby angel's head. It was in my rockery." Mrs. Jones was delighted. She ran in to tell Mother about my sister's cleverness in finding the baby angel's little head. She told Mr. Jones when he came home, and he got out his sticky glue and stuck it on at once. It looked so pretty when it was mended. Mrs. Coco took the baby angel to show my sister, and my sister saw that it was smiling at the basket of white flowers. "You are a good, clever child," Mrs. Coco said. She said that if my sister hadn't been so clever and made such a lovely rockery, she would never have found the angel's head. She said it must have fallen out of the paper when Mr. Coco burned the rubbish many years ago. I prize that angel very much. But she said that when my sister was a lady of 21, she would give her the baby angel as her very own. Wasn't that kind of her? And she did too. And if you go to my good grown-up sister's house, you will see the baby angel smiling at his flowers on my sister's mantelpiece.